Like this disaster in Egypt, a crisis on a global scale.
A blockage that was holding up billions of dollars of trade every day.
A supersized ship runs aground and a race against time to find a solution.
The front of the ship is now trapped, buried in the sand.
They needed to get the ship moved, and fast.
And the world economy is brought to its knees.
She's so large, so big, that when she careened out of control, she effectively blocked 12% of the world's trade in one motion.
Egypt, an ancient land full of epic feats of engineering.
When you say Egypt, you might think of the ancient pyramids, the Sphinx, but it's also home to one of the most vital trade routes on Earth, the Suez Canal.
Linking the Red Sea with the Mediterranean, this maritime shortcut dividing the continents of Africa and Asia is a true engineering marvel. Completed in 1869, it took more than 10 years to build. Associate Professor of History, Dr. Salvatore Macogliano, explains.
The Suez Canal was a massive undertaking. You had to dig 120 miles, 190 kilometers worth of sand and dirt, and it actually conjured up images of the pharaoh building the pyramids. They're building a new pyramid, but this pyramid links together two oceans.
In its more than 150-year history, the canal has become one of the world's most vital shipping lanes.
Previous to the Suez Canal, you had to circle around Africa an additional 15,000 miles in some cases. And it was seen as the bridging of two worlds, something that had never been accomplished before. What the Suez Canal provided was a shortcut.
Today, around 12% of world trade navigates the narrow channel.
In 2020, nearly 19,000 ships transited the Suez, carrying more than 1 billion tons of cargo.
As trade grew, so did the ships, on a mammoth scale. Like this, the Ever Given.
The Ever Given is a giant among ships and can carry 20,000 containers. It's known as Suez Max, the largest type of ship allowed through the canal.
Almost as big as the Empire State Building, these ships are pushing engineering to the very limit.
Ever Given is a quarter of a mile long, 200,000 tons. If you're standing on the lower deck and you look up at the container stack, you're seeing 24 8-foot containers stacked one on top of the other.
With such vast ships, navigating this narrow, shallow stretch of water is no cakewalk. Stephen Turnock is a professor of maritime fluid dynamics.
The Suez Canal, it's very narrow. There's not much water between the bottom of the ship and the bottom of the canal. Sort of the flow underneath the ship is forced through faster than it would normally do, and that kind of sucks the ship down towards the canal bed.
Known as the squat effect, the faster the ship moves through the water, the greater the effect is on the vessel, and the deeper it's forced to sail in the already shallow canal.
Suddenly it matters a lot that you keep within quite narrow bounds, you don't deviate to the left or right by very much, and that makes it particularly challenging for mariners to navigate through and to maintain the course that you want to go through safely.
With only about 9 meters of clearance between the bottom of the ship and the canal bed, any deviation can be catastrophic. During the early morning of Tuesday, March the 23rd, 2021, the 400-meter Ever Given, en route to the Netherlands, was in a convoy of ships traveling north.
It was the 5th vessel in a 25-ship convoy heading up the Suez Canal from the Red Sea into the Mediterranean.
Loaded with 18,300 containers, as the ship approached the entrance to the canal, it encountered heavy winds and a sandstorm blowing from the west. Right from the outset, the ship was struggling to stay on course.
The vessel was never in the center of the canal. It actually maneuvered from bank to bank.
Moving side to side, getting really close on one side, close on the other side, having difficulty controlling its course.
It wasn't just weaving. The Ever Given was also accelerating.
It started to speed up, progressively getting faster and faster, sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 plus knots.
At 7:40 a.m., the 200,000-ton ship crashed head-on into the side of the canal, ploughing around 5 meters into the sandy bank. The Ever Given was stopped in its tracks.
And what the vessel essentially did was ram its bow into Asia. The stern kept swinging northward. It ran aground in Africa. She was traversing the canal at such a high rate of speed that when she careened out of control, she effectively blocked 12% of the world's trade in one motion.
The figures are staggering. It's estimated that the Ever Given was holding up 3.3 million tons of cargo an hour, or $6.7 million a minute.
The ship was completely wedged across one of the busiest trade routes on the planet.
Her size and her scale fundamentally changed what this event was going to be. This event was going to have worldwide implications.
And the world was definitely watching. With the Suez Canal completely blocked and ships and trade at a standstill, the entire planet was searching for answers.
On average, more than 50 ships a day navigate the Suez without incident, and crucially, without making headlines. So the big question was, why did this one get stuck?
Examining the ship's global tracking device revealed that something was wrong from the moment the ship entered the canal. Associate Professor of History Dr. Salvatore Mercogliano explains.
If you follow the track line of the vessel was never in the center of the canal. It seemed to have lost control. It actually maneuvered from bank to bank.
As the investigation began, early reports suggested high winds were to blame. Professor of Fluid Dynamics Stephen Turnock explains that even for a ship weighing over 200,000 tons, this can be a major problem.
With big container ships, they're sticking a long way up into the air. If the wind is strong, then you get quite large forces. A wind was coming from its stern. Naturally, that wants to turn the ship. Actually makes it more difficult to control.
Not only were huge forces acting on the Ever Given from above, they were also at play from below.
The vessel is so large that it doesn't have a lot of water underneath it, and it doesn't have a lot of water next to it along the banks. And that creates forces that act on the vessel.
As well as the squat effect pulling the ship deeper, it was now being dragged towards the sides too by another phenomenon known as the bank effect. As the ship moves closer to the bank, water squeezing between the two surfaces speeds up, pulling the stern towards the canal side, effectively turning the ship.
What we saw happen was Ever Given got extremely close to the west bank, and she had to turn right. And unfortunately, she turned so hard right that it put her into the east bank.
The bank effect was too much of a challenge. You get away from that side, but you then get in trouble on the other side.
While there's little doubt this played a part in the wreck, another question remained. With the initial ships in the convoy making it through, why did this one speed up in the canal?
The Ever Given was reported to be doing 13.5 knots, almost 25 kilometers per hour. That's more than 50% over the speed limit for this size of ship.
The pilots may have actually gone faster to try to get better control of the vessel. The faster you go, the more maneuverable your vessel is. Drive a car down a highway, it takes only a small turn of the wheel to change lanes when you're going fast. The problem was when something goes wrong at that speed, there's very little margin for error.
With the rescue operation demanding help from across the globe, Plan A was to try and pull the ship free. Easier said than done. As geotechnical engineer Professor David White demonstrates, wet sand is hard to escape.
So in civil and maritime engineering, we use physical models of systems a lot. They're quick and easy to make, and we can just get a feel for the problem. Put it in a tank, got some sand representing the sandbank, and when it comes and hits the bank, it pushes into the bank, and the bow is buried. Dragging the ship backwards, which is maybe the first thought you might have, is very difficult because you've got the friction from that enormous weight resting on the front. If you do a quick calculation, maybe you're going to need 60 or 100 tugs to pull the ship back.
The Egyptians scrambled very quickly. They dispatched tugboats to the area and attempted to pull her off. The problem was, Ever Given, being solidly aground on the bow and stern, posed too much of a challenge, and it wound up being that the Egyptians could not move the vessel at all.
With billions of dollars of cargo and more than 300 ships backed up on both sides, it was time to go to Plan B.
Twisting it around is easier. If you try to pull the stern of the ship to the side, then actually the force you need is less, maybe just a handful of tugs. And this was the strategy that they adopted.
With larger anchor tugs and a specialized suction dredger, salvage teams were finally making progress.
This specialist suction dredger could shift around 2,000 cubic meters of material every hour. That's almost enough sand and mud to fill an Olympic swimming pool.
So once it was stuck on the bank up here, the dredging here needed to remove the sand over at this side in front of where the bow is going to push the sand out to allow it to then rotate.
Not only was this one of the most expensive delays in history, it was now also a race against time and the tide.
To free the Ever Given, they used all the resources at hand, even the moon. One thing that all mariners are aware of are tides. And in this case, a fortunate spring tide was happening at the end of the month.
Their best hope was on the Sunday, when water levels would be about half a metre higher than normal for just a few hours. That gave engineers a very real deadline to hit.
The combination of dredging and tugging, with some help from the moon, finally paid off. On Monday, March the 29th, at 3:05 p.m., after 6 long days, the Ever Given was finally free. And while it may be some time before we know the full story behind this crisis, it firmly highlighted the world's reliance on these colossal containers.
We've experienced before hurricanes and disasters that temporarily shut down trade, but never before had we seen an accident shut down 12% of the world trade and all of a sudden impact the entire globe.
After dominating the world headlines for 6 days, finally, this cargo megaship, the length of 4 football fields, was dislodged from the banks and on its way again. Gone, but definitely not forgotten.